Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Josefa Domingos. I'm a physiotherapist, and this is John Dean, speech language pathologist. And we are going to bring, hopefully, an interesting discussion today about how we should be looking at all the information that I think is overtaking us. As I think it's an interesting new problem that the internet brought to us even more. Okay, so our topic for today is really for us to think about how do I know if the Parkinson education resources, all the things that we are reading about, or even educational programs that we do in person are really trustworthy. And our goals will be really for us to just stop to think about what would be the relevance of us doing this talk, for example. Why would it be necessary for us to stop to think about if our educational resources are really trustworthy? We want to share with you some of the common challenges that people find, and also share the ones that you also shared with us in the questionnaires. And then, but our real focus will be on trying to give you quick and simple strategies that you can use so that whenever you are reading something about Parkinson or listening to something, that you can really be able to have a more critical thought about how good it is and how helpful, above all, it will be for you. So let's start with, I would say, the obvious. This would probably be what comes to mind when you think about why it is important for us to assess what we are reading. I'm sure this is something that everyone will agree with, which is obviously what we want is information that is valid and that above all is safe, so that it can be nice and useful to us. We also want to feel that it's not a scam or misinformation or unhelpful resources. So I think everyone here might agree that's true. But I did want to share with you that it's a topic that is somehow also becoming very relevant, to the point that we are having research studies that are trying to identify how harmful it is or not, the information that people are accessing, specifically the internet, that we have now access to a lot of information. And this was actually a study where they submitted surveys to 500 doctors to really try to assess what was the perception of maybe the effects of people accessing information online. And what was interesting is, like, nothing that was surprising. 81% of the physicians that were assessed had reported that they had already patients that obviously came in with information regarding that they obtained through the internet, right? I think this is more and more common. One of the positive things that were obviously suggested, and no one can really question this, is that the health information that people are accessing may truly enhance the patient's knowledge, right, and about their health. So that is something that we can easily get to, and that is the goal. That's why we're sharing the information. But they did find some other negative effects, which I think add on to the most obvious ones that we saw previously. Let me share that one with you, which is, we can put all three. So it was three that were placed. One was the costs. So it was increased cost of healthcare by adopting inappropriate health services. So imagine you read something that tells you that vitamin X, which doesn't exist, I'm just giving you an example, is really good for you to sleep or something, and then people start taking that. I'm just picking on vitamins now, but anything can be anything, and that obviously will have, if it has a harmful effect, that means your health goes down, right? And so you have more costs in trying to get the right help. So that one is also very obvious. And then we had another one which was intriguing, which is making the patients over concerned about their health. So this is something that all the doctors in the study perceived, which is interesting. So I wouldn't say we can say it's good to have access to lots of information. What we do with information has to be thought out. If it is really bringing us more concerns, that means it's not being so helpful. It might actually be provoking even more disease. And this is one of the concerns that is in the healthcare community at this moment. Another one was damaging the time efficiency of the visit, which was an interesting one to see, which meant that people might come in to the consultations with a big bunch of things that they took out of the internet that they want to discuss with the doctor, and that might be quite challenging for consultations that are usually time limited. Now, one of the things that came out from the study, which was interesting to know, and to know that it's actually been researched, was the solution. And I find that this is probably the best solution if we can convince all the doctors to be on board, which was that doctors are required not only to help the process of obtaining health information, but also aiding the patient in determining the quality of the information, as well as determining the specific information that will be suitable for the patient's individual unique conditions. Wouldn't this be nice? This is really the ideal situation, is that with your doctor you are able to define a strategy of what type of resources that you can look for more further information, and that he can help you distinguish what would be quality information and also what would be something that adapts to you. Of course, this is based on the relationship that we have with the doctors, and I would probably add on to the solution and say, okay, let's not limit this to the doctors. Any health professional that you work with should be able to help you in this process. So let's think now about some problems that we might encounter when we think about all the access to information that we have at this moment. And I have been, I would say, privileged to be part of several groups where we have lots of people with Parkinson that are exchanging a lot of information. I must say it's been very intriguing to see what is shared and how peers influence each other. And so this is actually the image that I got from that experience, is that you have a mixture in the group, which can be potentially very anxiety related, right? So you have someone that I don't want any information. So the two extremes. It's someone that is probably, I can give you an example, it can be multiple reasons, but the most common one is just having the information that people are receiving is causing more anxiety. This could be the person might not be able to deal with the amount of information, especially because obviously Parkinson is a complex disease. There's so many descriptions of the symptoms, and that can be highly overwhelming. But you can also get the problem that not all the information that you read is, I would say, applicable to you, or maybe not in a more practical way as well. So you have lots of talks where you might see on YouTube, were very descriptive of every single symptom, or even a problem, I don't know, like sleep. So you have like 40, 50 slides of what the problems with sleep are, and then you have one slide that actually tells you solutions. That is what I would call not more applicable to people, because ultimately what people want to understand the problem, but what they want is solutions to bypass it. Would you all agree? Okay. So on the other extreme, we have people that maybe have a different profile. That is, again, it could also be anxiety, which is fearful of the future, fearful of what Parkinson might bring, and then people are looking at information, gathering information. You can have people that might be gathering information but then don't really act upon it. So that means you're always jumping from one information to the other, or someone that's just reading everything. Now imagine when you put these two extremes in the same group. And I see that some people in our groups, for example, they actually leave the group because they can't take the pressure of always listening to new things that come out and new things that come out. Most of them are discussions on, imagine a new medication come out, and then someone with the more negative thought said, oh, it's always the same thing. It's never the cure, right? And at least don't take my hope away. So these are like discussions that I'm assisting. And I can imagine the despair of trying to keep that hope up when so much information is coming.
Well, and especially I think, where you are in this journey is also going to be someone who's been dealing with this for a decade or something like that versus someone like coming to this group that's recently diagnosed.
Yeah. I think, of course, the ideal solution would be, can I get just the right information at the right time? It seems pretty simple when we say it like that. The challenge for the health community, the scientific community, and even the patient community is what exactly is the right information for you and at what time, and how do we know it's your right time, right? So I think it's very challenging for us to be able to do educational resources and actually be able to reach everyone. And so let's see about here in this group, so the people that answered the questionnaire, where we had one person that said that they never looked at anything. Again, this can be related to different factors. I often hear things like, oh, it's my wife that looks into it, I don't. Which seems to be a good strategy if you have someone else, if you are not able to deal with so much overload of information. I would say that mostly every person that I know with Parkinson has received at least an email from a friend or from a family that saw something on the news and decided to share it, right? Or every time something new or Parkinson related, they get sent information on it. And so when I hear the person's like, I can't deal with that, it's just so irritating to receive that from friends and family all the time. Especially if it's like things on the news where it's more like sensational type of news, like, wow, this is a new medication that's going to cure something, right? So those gives a lot of hope, and then it's not really real. So.
Someone was just talking about that in one of our classes the other day. Like, oh, I thought it was new, and it's like, yeah, it's actually just a new way to deliver an older medication, and that's not bad. I mean, that can help, but. Yeah, you can get real information overload if everyone's like, hey, did you see this new way to do this? And it's like, okay, yeah.
And then it goes back to what type of person and profile you are. If you like to receive those moments of hope, right? So I think no one has the right to take that away. But at the same time, if it's more harmful, then it should be rethought. And what we see here is like we have one person that sees information daily. I should have asked if it was new information. Several times a week. So most of the people are looking, I would say, reasonably like once a month to twice a month. And of course, this has to do if you have a new problem. I would imagine that either you recently diagnosed and you're looking into information that can be helpful, or suddenly you're having sleep issues and you want to dive a little deeper into that. And so you will look it up.
I think that's really healthy. Yeah. And here's the topics they're looking at.
So from your answers, what we saw is that most of you are looking into things regarding exercise, which as a physiotherapist, I'm very happy to see. There are more concrete topics that we can find answers. For example, medication might be more objective because it passes through the doctor. Exercise, you might get multiple opinions. So you might get access to multiple sources of information, and it might make it hard for people to take decisions. But it's good that people are looking up for options, for sure. The other was symptoms. So understanding the Parkinson's symptoms, I think, is usually one very common one. Less so, we'd have alternative therapies. Sometimes sensitive topics that maybe you feel that you don't really have the space to talk about in the consultation might be the ones that you actually go and look for. So we all dream of open conversations with the doctors, but we know that doesn't happen as frequently. Ideally, it should. But so if you're talking about alternative therapies like cannabis or what do you call it?
I remember when they legalized marijuana in Colorado, and that was something where there was a ton of misinformation out there. And early on, I think the doctors were pretty leery about what they could and couldn't say, to the point where they had the first conference about it in Canada and the U.S. in Colorado, just to get a position about it.
So if you have a more conservative doctor, he might say there is no evidence to support the use of A, B, C, and D. This is the most common response because they have to keep you safe, right? The goal is to give you the best recommendations. That's why they study. And that doesn't mean they might not be in favor of the other ones, but we still don't know enough to assure that that is safe. And so recommending it is assuming a role. But then just being able to be open enough to have that conversation with you, to say it's okay. It's like, if you decide to do it, do give me feedback, let me know what you are doing so that I can write it here. I can't recommend it as a therapy because it's not evidence-based. So this would be, I would think, the best answer from a doctor. Okay, and then we had other challenges for you. We specifically wanted to see in the group what is the biggest challenge when looking into information regarding Parkinson. And the number one that came was really finding practical advice for daily living with Parkinson, which goes in line with what I said previously. It's something that people often share with me. It's very hard to find talks that actually give me information that I can use after. Yes, and then we had other things that were challenging, which was not knowing where to look. Then finding updated and accurate information. So there is some concern that towards if it is accurate or not. And I think there's several. Each one of these could be relevant, but then accessing information tailored to my specific needs or symptoms. Which it's hard to make these educational resources very specific, because usually we're giving general recommendations. One way that at least John and I have been challenging ourselves to do, which is really get the questionnaires in so that we can get more information about the questions that you're having regarding this topic, whatever topic we're doing. And I think it's a way for us to really be more pinpointing the challenges that you might have.
I think this one is also important too, when people talk about getting so many things coming in there, and someone very cogently identified this issue. You get a lot of information that's similar sounding from different resources. What do you do with that? Mm-hmm. It becomes a source of overload. We'll get into all those solutions.
We're going to try and give you tips so that you can be able to make choices when this happens. One of the intriguing things was, okay, how useful was the information? And do people actually apply it after they, go through a talk or so? And these were just some of the comments that people give, which sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's applied. Depends on the topic, right? Useful, but can result in information overload. Sometimes I apply it, but not often. And then someone that had mixed feelings, because PD is so specific to the individual, generalizations are often not possible. Yes, so there are topics that are more easier to do. I think we're gonna focus obviously in one that people mention often, which is just having, I have to trust the information that I'm accessing. And sometimes I have too many resources, I have too many talks, sometimes happening everything at the same time. The quality of it, then we were actually trying to come up with a criteria. It's like, if I have two talks that are happening at the same time, how am I going to choose? And then I was going to say, what we should tell people is, like we do when we're going to select a film that we're going to watch.
Netflix or something.
So we've created this criteria of, I'll give it 10 minutes. And then if both of us decide that it's good, then we stay with that film. So maybe we can use, it's like, give it a 10-minute opportunity. And I say 10 minutes because usually 5 minutes is just for us to introduce the topic, to really make sense of why we're talking about that. And then hopefully that is at least one criteria that you can use.
Yeah, if they get in there and they say something incorrect in the first 10 minutes, that's one ding. Maybe if they say two things incorrect, then it's maybe time to move on.
Or if it's making you sleepy or something.
There's
so many things that can happen, right?
So, a lot of that.
So I think we're coming to our ultimate goal of this talk, and the goal was really to help you, give you actionable things that you can use to assess whatever you are listening to, reading, or watching.
Yeah, I mean, that is really the title. Yeah. How do you know if these resources that you're using are trustworthy? And I think there's a lot of pieces to that, so we'll just start breaking it down one at a time. Oh, it's not doing it there. Okay, so finding resources that are from places that are reputable and established, I think, is really important, especially because the internet provides a vast resource out there, but it doesn't take much for someone to make themselves look like an expert or a professional without really having the bona fides to really back that up. And so the first place I usually refer people for baseline, top quality information are going to be recognized medical societies. And these are institutions, some of them are international, so the International Parkinson and Movement Disorder Society, often referred to as the MDS because it was the Movement Disorder Society for many years. That's the international governing body for healthcare providers who specialize in Parkinson's. And for those of you who are seeing a movement disorder specialist, it's probably 99% sure that they're probably a movement disorder specialist who's a member of this society. It has about 13,000 members worldwide, and it covers people who work with Parkinson's, and then dystonia, and then different Parkinsonisms, and a whole wide range of movement disorders. And one thing that they have is they have quite a number of resources that are directly for people living with Parkinson's, directed towards them, and they have them translated in quite a number of languages. I think the last time I looked, it was like 28 languages. And so that's one great place to look. And it's also, if you have a healthcare provider, hopefully they're part of it, but if they're not, that's a great place for them to learn about stuff. The NIH, the National Institutes of Health, is the U.S. organization. It's actually based pretty close to where many people are in Northern Virginia. It's actually in Maryland. And again, they not only do they fund quite a bit of the research that is being done on Parkinson's, they have resource pages that have comprehensive definitions and information about emerging therapies and pharmaceuticals. There's actually a there's a NIDCD, which is Institute of I'm gonna mess it up. NINDS, I'm sorry, neurological diseases, and they also have a subpage in there where it has a lot of stuff about Parkinson's. And then the American Academy of Neurology is the overarching body for neurologists. So it includes movement disorder specialists as well as people that work with, people who've had stroke or unexplained pain or headache, all the community stuff. And that's not as focused on Parkinson's, but they do have quite a bit of good material, and every year they have the conference. This year it was in Denver. There's always some relevant information for Parkinson's. It's interesting, the MDS was born out of the AAN in the mid-'80s when Stanley Fawn broke it off there, so they're still quite well connected. But the overarching one, I would say, is the MDS.
Yes.
So would you have something you want to add there?
No, because I was just going to highlight that if you are working with a professional and they might be coming on too strong in terms of their of what you recommending or what they're recommending. Mm-hmm. Sometimes professionals unfortunately become too pushy on their recommendations, and I think it would be a red flag if they are not aware of the MDS. It's a red flag because it's anyone that's working with Parkinson is a source of information. It's a source of educational resources for us, and we don't have a lot of courses for Parkinson, so I think it would be a red flag.
That's a very good explanation. I mean, sometimes I see experts on the news, and I'm like, oh, well, it's like our first thing I'm looking is like, first of all, if it's not a name I recognize, I look them up to see if they're part of MDS, if they're talking about Parkinson's. Okay, well, so that's the big overarching kind of non-governmental or sometimes governmental agency. But then you could also have prominent medical centers. The Muhammad Ali Parkinson Center in Phoenix, Arizona. Barrow Neurological Institute is really where it's based. The Mayo Clinic obviously has a great reputation, and interestingly, the Mayo Clinic has a number of branches. So there's a Mayo Clinic that's actually down in Arizona. There's obviously the one in Rochester. There's one in Jacksonville, Florida, and so they often have good materials. And Cleveland Clinic is another one where it's a very well-recognized center. And they have a branch in Las Vegas, and they have a branch down in Florida as well. And I would say that you can take that and apply that to any large center of repute. So if you're nearby someplace, and it's probably going to have a great reputation. And also, if you see something interesting coming out from one of these centers, it's probably reliable because it's coming there. But then if you're going to go ahead and look for that, especially for you folks in Northern Virginia, I would also encourage you to shop local. Especially if you're working with a movement disorder specialist, go to their website because they'll often have quite a bit of material, and they'll probably have some local resources. And then if you're lucky, like we are with Innova, they'll actually have a newsletter you can sign up for, so they'll actually send you information. You won't have to search it out. It'll come to you. And that's just on the one hand, It'll let you know a little bit about the way your doctor looks at some of these things, their philosophy, but also it'll probably have resources that are directed towards your region. So support groups or exercise programs or educational programs. I just kind of highlighted some of those on the ipmdc.org website there. So again, don't forget your own doctor and your own regional area, because there are going to be a lot of great things there. You don't necessarily have to go to Mayo. Now, people talk about wanting to go to a nonprofit, and I think nonprofits have a great role in providing education because they often have to vet things. And I think especially if you're looking for a particular voice, so if you're looking for a particular approach, for example, Michael J. Fox Foundation, their focus is on finding a cure for Parkinson's. So when you're looking at emerging tools for things that might get towards a cure, their publications and their releases are going to focus on it, although they do have excellent material for, I saw something earlier about if you're considering deep brain stimulation. They have a great nutrition packet. Other ones, Davis Finney is for people that live well today, quality of life. Brian Grant has quite a bit of exercise information. World Parkinson's Coalition is very focused on including the voice of people living with Parkinson's very prominently, so it's a conference where they do that. So they all have a different voice, and once you find a voice that you like, that's valuable. My only caveat with a nonprofit is that some of the information may not be, I'm sorry, I looked at the chat there. They may not be able to speak definitively to some of the more scientific information, because generally the people working there are going to be people with a master's in public health or master's in nonprofit management, and they'll supplement that by bringing in great experts and bringing in people that have knowledge, and that's how they get around it. But sometimes going back to your doctor directly may be the easier way to interpret something emerging. One thing, go ahead.
Shall we?
Yeah, Mayo.
In the chat, we have a comment.
Yeah, Mayo and Cleveland Clinic both said no way to diagnose PD and no word about the SIN1 diagnostic. SIN1 is a skin biopsy, and you're correct that there is no definitive diagnosis for Parkinson's. There are many things that we can do to give us more or less information, such as a DAT scan, a dopamine activation transport scan, can tell us a little bit about Parkinson's, but it can't necessarily delineate between Parkinson's and atypical Parkinson's. And then it might have a situation with that skin biopsy. It does provide some pretty interesting information, including about atypical Parkinson's, but none of them is 100% yet. And it's not like for someone living with Huntington's disease, you can pretty much look for CAG repeats on the chromosome and you can see it. And so that's not available for Parkinson's yet. There is the seeded synuclein assay that's coming that Michael J. Fox Foundation was prominent in getting brought into the community. So it's getting better, but you're absolutely right. And this is also why I think it's valuable to have the expertise of a movement disorder specialist, because in the absence of something definitive, the expertise of someone who's worked with thousands of people living with Parkinson's over the years is going to give them the ability to thin slice and visually appraise things in a way that you can't get from a textbook.
I would probably just, as I look at this comment, I would imagine that you might have websites, or in this case, a clinic, where they take a more conservative and objective approach, closer to what we know in terms of evidence, versus a more, let me get closer to patient voice. And so I'm sure you will find other websites where they'll say Parkinson is diagnosed with bradykinesia plus rigidity plus tremor plus this. So I can imagine that this information might become like there's a mismatch, but I think it's how close people, or the website itself is closer to medical community or not. I think that's where you'll feel that difference.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Is that strictly speaking, it's kind of like when you start looking at evidence of efficacy. Remember the conference in Dublin where my profession, my speech language therapy profession, was decided to be, possibly useful due to the evidence, and her profession was likely efficacious. And as a clinician working with people, I said, well, I think I'm more than possibly useful. But the reality is when you start looking at grading the scientific evidence strictly on those guidelines, that's the correct answer. It may seem a little stodgy, but it's adhering to pretty strict scientific principles.
So it's where they are in the spectrum of defending more science or less, being more rigorous or not, and not necessarily. It's a different voice, I would say. And I would imagine they wouldn't put any tests there unless it's been ultimately recommended in the MDS guidelines, right? If you really want to be accurate, you will not expose people to information that's still not completely valid. Again, that's almost, the website should be divided, and we will go into how you can see the differences.
Just going to that exact topic, even some of the most well-recognized medications are considered likely efficacious or efficacious, and nothing is definitive at that point. It's not. There's no golden answers, I guess we'll say. So when we're looking at nonprofits here, one thing we want to make sure is these are all the U.S.-based nonprofits, but I wouldn't neglect resources that are outside of the U.S. Obviously, Parkinson's Europe, where Josefa is quite involved as the president, has a great set of materials out there. They have a wonderful magazine that they put out I think it's every month, called Parkinson's Life, that has lots of really great articles that are very approachable and written in language that you can absorb pretty easily. And they do a very good job of making sure they're staying on top of what's out there in the community. And then I like Parkinson's UK quite a bit as well, because they have quite a bit of great English language materials, and particularly some of the ones that I don't think are as covered as well. They have a great package on diet and nutrition that I like quite a bit. And then if you need language materials that are in languages that are not English, quite a number of nonprofits will have Spanish language materials in the United States, but if you want to go beyond that into a language that's not typically, like German or something like that, that's another place where the partner organizations for Parkinson's Europe can help you find some good materials. So I wouldn't neglect those. And again, I think Parkinson's UK in particular has some nice approaches, just because they have a nice national health service, so they have a different way of looking at things. Okay, make sure. And then obviously support groups are really great sources of information, and they're particularly good for one-on-one question asking. If you have a physician coming in or another healthcare professional, it's probably your best chance to ask them a question. And obviously they have to be somewhat careful when they don't know your specific situation, but you can often get more personalized information there. And then also, more importantly, you can get information from other people living with Parkinson's, recommendations for classes, maybe good or bad feedback about different healthcare providers or where to look for a good healthcare provider. And the better groups will actually do a good job of keeping on top of breakthroughs in research, and they'll often send out their own announcements about upcoming meetings, and they'll have some of that information there.
I would add that based on the experiences that I've had, I would probably always recommend that you have someone with some health background present if possible, or at least someone that's keeping updated in things. Mainly not, I wouldn't say as the person that's always intervening. I part of these groups that I told you in terms of the even WhatsApp groups, and I don't see my role as coming in as a health professional correcting everyone all the time. I don't think that is useful. I think the sharing information is interesting to see, but it's also good that I'm there sometimes and I can help them, help people in terms of identifying things that might be less safe. Okay, so it's sometimes, I'm going to try this type of medication. The doctor prescribed this, and then someone comes in and says, that's horrible, it gives me this. And just coming in at the right time with a more I would say, I'm looking for the right word.
Nuanced is what I think you're looking for.
Yes, so just guiding people in thinking about, at that point, the person might be different. The medication, the doctor probably prescribed it for a different reason. Consider the reason why the doctor prescribed that medication. Sometimes you can have those effects. So just lighting up a little bit of all the looking at the problem from different aspects and helping people in getting the right questions might be really helpful, because sometimes people share a lot of things that doesn't work with them, or it works with them, but might not be applicable to the other person.
I think I 100% agree. I really love being involved with support groups because it does help. I learn a lot just by hearing the kind of questions people are asking when it's not really formalized and they're talking back and forth amongst themselves, but also steering the conversation towards the best resources, or if there's something that looks a little fishy, maybe stem cells. They got a big deal maybe 7 or 8 years ago when a lot of stem cell studies were being put onto the clinicaltrials.gov, and they were not being regulated, and they were asking for money. It was a big mess. So being able to be part of that and be like, hey, there's no evidence.
I would just kindly being present,
Yeah.
not snobbishly being present.
I will say that, and this is now, I think many areas have gotten pretty smart to this, and that's why we have this specific group. People who are recently diagnosed might be looking for a group that is closer aligned in their early parts of getting the diagnosis and figuring out what their next steps are. Sometimes groups that have been around and have all the ranges, those are also valuable, but it can be a barrier to getting the kind of information. Someone who's had Parkinson's for 2 or 3 or 4 years has a much different set of needs than someone who's had it for 10 or 12 or 15 years.
Which is challenging to find, right? Specifically, people that you identify yourself completely. I have a couple of people that I follow that tried to go into support groups, and were just recently diagnosed, and they said it made them more depressed and increased the anxiety, and probably it will have influence about progression, right? So it shouldn't be taken lightly, because the wrong information can really do a lot of harm.
A lot of things when you're trying to get encouragement and inspiration.
When you say the wrong information, now I was wrong, is like at the wrong time. The right information at the wrong time can also do some harm.
For sure, it can throw people off, for sure. Facebook has emerged in a way that it's really one place where I think you see so many different flavors of groups out there, and some of them are private groups where you have an admin that asks you some questions to make sure that you are, a person living with Parkinson's, and you're not there to sell things. You can publish posts anonymously if you have a question that you want to ask. I do have to say that, just to be real clear, Facebook is absolutely monitoring and monetizing everything that you're looking on there. And if you don't believe me, click on an ad and see how many more times that ad shows up later on. I've actually been involved in a couple of startups trying to make different kinds of versions of like a private Facebook, and the amount of information available is pretty interesting. But also, I think Facebook continues to win the battle. Neither of those startups really worked, and I think it's just a matter that there's so many people on that platform, other social media platforms as well. But I think Facebook is one I see most of our people on.
People are just comfortable, right? You learn how to work with it, and now suddenly they're telling you to go to another website, and you have to figure out. So I think it's just keeping comfort zone.
Just be a little bit cautious about, sharing information that shouldn't be shared, and certainly anything that could be lead to fraud or any kind of deceit. There are some dedicated online forums, and that's also another place you can look. Smart Patients is actually associated with the APDA, although I remember being at a presentation in Stanford at Medicine X when the founder of it was just launching it, like 2014. And interestingly, he left. He took a buyout, and he works for Facebook, or at least he worked for Facebook, which I think is telling. But they have nice materials on there, and it's something that is in conjunction with one of the nonprofits. And one that I go to quite frequently is called Health Unlocked, and it's actually from the UK, and it has certain nonprofits like the Cure Parkinson's Trust, which is kind of the equivalent of the Michael J. Fox Foundation over here. I love that. I love those people. I really like going there a lot. Parkinson'sDisease.net is, I think, a Health Union's product, and I think that's nice. But just remember, if it's free, you're the product. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't be asking questions. Just be careful what kind of personal information you're sharing. And then I will point out the Parkinson's Foundation has restructured it, but they have a nice forum that you can go there and interact with others. They used to have an Ask the Doctor feature that I loved, and you could literally have someone like Michael Oken get on there and answer a question every now and then. And it's like, that was amazing, but that's gone. So it's just peer-to-peer, which is great. There's nothing bad to say about that. Then there's another product that I push people towards sometimes. If you're trying to get a feel for, my doctor wants me to take this medication, and I'm not sure. I read the little insert label, which I got to tell you, don't do that, because the insert label has all the scariest language in the world, and not all of it is applicable. This is an initiative that was initially a startup that came up on its own. It got bought by Microsoft maybe a half dozen years ago. It's called Patients Like Me, and it actually has it for all disease states. So it could be anything, but the Parkinson's one has a number of different areas. So you can ask people how they're doing with a prescription drug that they're taking, or something over the counter, or a supplement, or a procedure like deep brain stimulation. And again, it's a nice way to get a peer-to-peer input. It's someone who has lived experience asking or answering a question about their actual experience on it, and that's pretty valuable. Again, some things about privacy with that, so just be careful what you are and aren't sharing. And I would say, especially if you're starting to consider some of the more advanced therapies like DBS, I think you'll get some of your best information from your peers in a support group, because they'll also be able to point you to resources that are nearby, and I think that's valuable. I'm just going to put this in here for a second because I think it's interesting. ChatGPT is known as a large language model, and basically what they've done is they have hoovered up, they have collected all of the information on the internet and provided in a format where you can basically ask it a question, and it'll go through all that information and sort it into a response that often sounds like a person has written it. And I was involved in something where we were trying to build a database like this, and when ChatGPT came out, that project pretty much died. And they were like, "Oh, this is amazing," but very quickly we found that ChatGPT has been trained on literally everything out there, including transcription of a lot of audio from YouTube videos, and not all that information is reliable, and not all that information is given to you in a way that's useful, rather than some of it's persuasive to sell you something. And so we're finding it's not that great of a resource, and there's something known as hallucinations, where the ChatGPT will very confidently tell you, "Oh yes, this is the answer, and here are the things that you should do," and answer 3 is wrong. Like, we don't do that surgery anymore. We don't prescribe ergot-derived dopamine agonists anymore. We stopped doing that 20 years ago. And so the confidence with which it provides that misinformation is frightening, and it's something that needs to be solved. And now when you go into ChatGPT to ask it a question, it'll say, "Be careful, hallucinations can happen and misinformation may occur." Well, that's not where I would ask questions for it. And even I played around with doing some exercise ideas in there, and I'm like, "Oh, it's amazing. It gave me 20 exercises right away." And then you do the exercise, and they're mostly garbage. So it's like, that's why you need to have a designer there in a human. So ChatGPT, not yet. Someone will make one that's better, that's more targeted towards what we're looking at, and at that point we'll have another conversation. But today, probably not worth it. I want to also recommend the books that you see coming out. I think one of I used to love reading biographies when I was growing up, especially when I was a musician, and I love reading music biographies, and I feel the same way. I get a lot of inspiration from people with lived experience talking about their experience directly. And so don't neglect books. That My Degeneration by Peter Dunlap Scholl that I put at the top there, he was a political cartoonist for many years, and he made a graphic novel in which he was able to draw things that I've just never seen anywhere else. And Ben Stetcher has been publishing books with different famous doctors, and it's really great information. So don't neglect all those possible options that are out there. And even someone talking about their personal experience, like A.C. Woolmall, he's got a lot of great stories, and it kind of gives you an inspiration about, like, here's a way you can look at life with Parkinson's. So don't neglect those. I think they're really great. Now, I think something that Josefa was alluding to before is that timing matters, and the date matters. Not only the timing of the information if you're dealing with Parkinson's for 2 years versus 12, but how recently something was published is relevant. And I think Parkinson's information does expire over time. It has a date on it, because things that happened 10 years ago, we don't do it that way anymore, and maybe something new's come along.
And we were happy to see that this was actually important for people.
Yes.
So I think that makes this group aware that it is important when I open up an article or a news information that I look at the date and when is this information applicable to. So that was a nice surprise, because what we want from the educational resources is that they will reflect the latest research and evidence, as we were mentioning. So specifically, we just want to highlight that key messages that make sure if you haven't thought about this, that the resources are really updated, and check the publication dates always, considering this.
Yeah, just a rule of thumb. I would even say more than 5 years, it's starting to get pretty long. In the 7 years, it's like dog years. I feel like, it's like a book that's 7 years old. Medications come on and off the market. Emerging technologies are not there. So less than 3 years, that's fantastic. Less than 5 years is probably okay, but definitely talk with your doctor or your healthcare provider. But there's a great book out of Muhammad Ali that I would love, 100 Questions and Answers, but it just needs to be updated because it's like 12 years old now. And it, great insights, but too old now.
And then another key message would be that reliable education resources, they are resources that cite their sources. So they have references, they should have citations. And this is one of the questions that we also placed. And by doing the questionnaire, we were also helping you think about the topic. And this was also one that we saw that often people actually go and look. Sometimes it wouldn't be the most obvious one, but making sure that when people make a recommendation, that there is at least one reference below those PowerPoints, for example.
And I think a lot of the nonprofits have caught up to that. The aggregators certainly have, and I think that's good. And if there's relevant or irrelevant citations, that's a red flag. That's your first one. Like, well, why are they talking about this? When, why is it talking about MS in a citation when we're talking about Parkinson's? Very few things apply uniformly to all kinds of diseases.
And then another thing, depending on what type of information, educational resource we're talking about, like could be a talk, it could be something that you're reading, could be a more scientific article, something from a nonprofit. But based on that, it's just also thinking about maybe the person that's delivering, to what point are we actually looking to see if the person is really credible, especially if it's regarding some product or something that you really want to apply in your daily life. So here people, the majority said that sometimes they would look at the credentials, which brings on another problem, which is how do I know if the person's an expert? And that is ultimately we have some key questions that people can consider, which is really the number of people that people might be seeing, the number of people with Parkinson that person has seen, usually is an indicative of expertise. So if it's someone that sees one person with Parkinson every month or every year, just thinking about the relevance of having contact with people with Parkinson so that you are continuously updating and also investing in education in it, right? Yeah,
getting credentials and then also applying those information. That's one of the first.
And then there's specific programs. What you can see here in the slide is that people are recognizing, especially in the exercise world, that are specific educational resources that therapists should. If you are working with Parkinson, you probably have at least one of those.
Yeah, and more is better. Coming back to the MDS, again, even for non-physician health providers, there are quite a number of people, we're both members of the MDS. I'm pretty involved with it. You're involved in different committees. And they actually have a tool on there where you can go look up and find a therapist in your area that actually has credentials with the MDS, and that's great. So that's another big one. Again, any Parkinson's related training is relevant. So it's not this brand and not that brand. It's like as long as they're doing Parkinson's related work. When you start seeing people who don't have relevant professional credentials, and it doesn't mean there are doctors out there that have MBAs, as long as they have an MD, that's relevant. But if they're not neurologists, in particular, if they're not movement disorders neurologists, I saw something a while back from a cardiologist, and I'm just like, okay, you went to medical school, that's great, we're talking about Parkinson's, not heart function. So if there's something where the product or the service, whatever, says that it works for, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and MS and ALS, like, well, those are totally different diseases, and that worries me. That's what you see a lot of times with stem cell treatments, not the ones that are being researched like at the University of Kyoto or, something like that, but actually just fake stuff. And if they're trying to sell product too, I think selling product is always a red flag.
Okay, so we're almost there. Just
Yep.
2 more ideas for you to think about.
When you come up with something that's interesting and it captures your attention, start looking and see if you see it anywhere else. This is where a good nonprofit and where the national institutes can be very helpful. It's like, I heard this really interesting thing and I'm really excited about it. The vibrotactile glove that Peter Tass came with at Stanford. Okay, once you start seeing multiple people talking about it, that's helpful. There should be no bias in the material. So if anybody has something they're like, what your doctor doesn't want you to know, or some nonsense like that, that's a bad sign. And then, do they cover it well, thoroughly? Are there gaps there? Or, again, misinformation. If I see someone with a typo, that doesn't worry me. If I see someone saying something weird that doesn't make sense, that's a problem. If I see that twice, I'm probably done reviewing that material. That's probably not helpful.
And that's really, so how in the accuracy, I would say, is a key factor. And of everything that we reflected on, the best solution was really to ask your doctor, right?
Always.
Because
or your physical therapist.
Or the health professionals that are around
Yeah.
you that can guide you to resources of good quality. I think it's probably the best strategy.
Yeah, and especially like emerging pharmacological stuff, that's really doctor stuff, and they'll have seen the research and they'll be able to process it in an accurate way, and that's valuable. Yeah, we just put this out. I love this slide
And
here.
the last one, so it's really about how do we assess, right?
Yeah.
So just how do we assess, the intention? So thinking about whatever I'm reading, is there an intention behind? Is there a hidden agenda, right?
Yeah.
So this would be our last one. And so which brings us to, how do I spot Parkinson baloney, right?
So again, if it's purely educational, probably safe. But if it's purely educational and it comes near the end of and this is why you need A, B, or C, or maybe promoting the viewpoint to avoid a certain approach because it's not, like a lot of people push against pharmacological solutions. It's like, well, that's a bad sign. That's not good.
So we've got a couple of here to think about.
Yeah.
Here, our gentleman is going to give you a tip that maybe questionable data, so something that is, too hard to be true or too good to be true. Only evidence presented in testimonies, so it's just based on people saying, wow, that was fantastic. That ultimately should alert you. The other one is if the information is tied to selling products or cures or other miraculous products. I think those are key words that you should be looking out for. The other one is the lack of information. The information is from an author where you see that is not even working with Parkinson, for example, as we mentioned, the credentials. And then, and then finally is really the reference to too good to be true, right? There's something there that really is not, it's giving you some sort of mistrust and inconsistencies or something that you get the feeling. I think most people, we are looking for hope, but we must be careful to what we are looking for.
Well, and there is hope in the right places. There was that wonderful study from Yale that showed the exercise improving the Parkinson's. That's great. What you got to worry about is someone feeding off that. I need to find the cure, and feeding off that to sell you something that's not real. And I think that happens all too often. And I have to be honest, Facebook, whenever I report these spammy things, they're not very good at capturing that.
Okay, so hopefully we got those 4 tips for you to use to guide you. We did want to go into questions. We have a question here. Do you want to read the question?
Okay, yeah, sure. This is a great one, too. Without mentioning names, at least one nonprofit you listed appears heavily influenced by pharma companies and equipment manufacturers. How do you tease out the possible bias? And I think, this is something that I think in this day and age, I think quite a number of nonprofits work with industry as a funding source, and that does represent, potentials for conflict of interest. When you start seeing things that are promoting that, there's a line. I mean, if it says, sponsored content from, I'm not going to say a name of a nonprofit or company, but, sponsored by this equipment manufacturer, that's at least telling you that there's probably some bias there, and it's almost, I won't say it's a paid ad. There will be medical information. Frankly, when we go to Parkinson's conferences, you can go to a lunch every day as long as you're willing to listen to a paid, and it'll have a wonderful doctor that's well known, but reading from a very well vetted deck that's provided by the pharma and regulated by the FDA. So I think
the bias will be present probably in all resources. I think even the medical society, as you're saying, right?
Honestly,
we hope that the professionals that are delivering that, the intention of whatever you're reading is probably not to sell something. I will give you an example of a decision we had to make in a nonprofit that I work with, which is we wanted to highlight the advanced therapies options, and because we had a request from Imagine Medtronic. And so it's like, okay, but if we're going to do that for one company, then we should talk with the others and let's show all the options so that people can make their choice. So I think even when we have a specific request from one of the pharmaceutical companies, can we come to an agreement that we need to have all the information from all points of view? Hopefully that can happen, but yes, I can see your point that it's very hard to filter that because it's all about funding.
But that is one way that you'll see it. They'll talk about advanced therapies, and so they'll talk about deep brain stimulation as well as the focused ultrasound and perhaps even Duopa, the duodenal pump. And so that way they cover the ground, and then someone does cover it. You are hitting on one of the kind of slippery slope kind of problems out there. I would say that the general information, the general background information about Parkinson's should be without bias, and often is. But again, if you see something where it's underwritten by or sponsored by, your perception is correct.
It just occurred to me that probably one of the best ways to filter or trust more is if you have the patient's voices there. So usually you will have testimonies of people with Parkinson coming in and talking about the device. Of course, they could just select the people that went well, and they don't get the person that went wrong, right? That maybe didn't go so well. That's true. But it's very hard to get someone with Parkinson to actually tell something that's really not real, I think, because it will be, our body language says a lot. So you can also identify that is just how truthful the testimony is being.
I fear the day when we have influencers like you see on TikTok and Instagram who are selling hair care products or whatever, like doing that. I hope that we get to that point for Parkinson's, that there's regulatory oversight, because it could be very bad. But not today. Again, vote with your notes. If you see one entity that's doing that and crossing the line far too often,
reach out to them, I would say. Let them know, because sometimes they're so involved they might not even realize that that's happening.
You're being nice to me. I say cross them off your list, but go ahead and reach out to them and let them know.
Let's be generous.
Yeah, there you go.
They're trying their best.
Someone's asking in the survey, how do you get access to more personalized information? We had mentioned the support groups, but I also think live programs allow you to ask more personalized questions, with a caveat that your specific medical advice, that's going to be your doctor still. But it is a nice way to avoid catching something on the broadcast later on. You get to have your point. We would never. The individual asked this very good question about the influence of pharma. We would not have gotten into that. That wasn't one of our slides. So that's how you get it in.
And then this was a question that was also from our survey. The person said, when submitting questions, I really receive a response. Very frustrating. And I told John, we should really put this so that
we see it.
We see you.
We're frustrated for you. So, yes. If you have a question, please put it in now.
I can imagine that maybe if you have a talk where you have lots of things coming into the chat, it might be challenging for the person that's giving the talk to go through them all.
Yeah.
But again, I think we have to learn from these comments, which is our talk cannot be 100 slides. There has to, part of the conversation is taking questions.
Yeah.
Part of the talk. part of the 1 hour, and by this I'm already committing a crime because we are over time.
Yeah.
But just hopefully we can maybe raise awareness that a presentation is not only the PowerPoints. It's time for people to take questions as well, so that we can organize better the questions.
This one thing here, we're gonna burn through this I think, a little bit here. This person has said something that's really important. Is like you see the same information from multiple entities, and you end up getting 3 webinars on the same topic. And I remember when I first got into Parkinson's, I wanted to have a meeting of the 5 families like they did in The Godfather, and say, like, you're going to handle this and you're going to handle that. And that's not going to happen, unfortunately. So then find the voice that you like and do what we do when we want to watch something on Netflix. Give something 10 minutes, and if you like the way the person's talking and they're saying great stuff, keep with it. And if not, there's an embarrassment of resources out there. So,
and hopefully this is not happening from the same entity that you're looking at.
Yeah.
So hopefully they are. Imagine if you're following, I don't know, Innova. And so I'm sure that Sonia is very highly efficacious, and she can see what type of talks are being done, and she wouldn't put 3 at the same time, right? With the same topic. So I think it's just making sure that maybe the places where if it's multiple people are repeating a lot of talks, for sure.
Well, and I think we're biased, but I think Sonia keeps track of a lot of them. So she's also looking for topics that aren't out there in other places, and that's why we keep coming back. I don't want to get too deep into this. I just want to say that research can be difficult to parse, and not all of it's created equal. And often you see information about a very early study. You see something like a pilot study or acceptability or feasibility. Those are early studies, and the likelihood that they get to a point where you can go to your doctor and say, give me this substance or whatever, it could take some time. So again, it's good to see it. If it's in a non-human study, like an animal study, that's cool, especially for inspiration or ideas about where to look. But by the time that becomes something that you can get at the pharmacy, it could be 10, 12 years. And so let's stay with it without getting too far along. And I'll just say, if you're looking at actual research study, phase 1 is very early. Phase 2 is still pretty early, and they're checking different dosages. Phase 3 studies are where we start to get interested, because after a successful phase 3 study, then the drug goes onto the market with the FDA, and then they do a phase 4 where they monitor results over time. So I see some more points going. You got it? Yeah.
Yes, I think Sonia had answered.
I see 3 more. Can you pull those up? And then someone just said, because their hands are getting tired, if you don't have the ability to do that, I always like to tell people to go to Google Alerts. You can go to a Google Alert and put in something like, I have about 30 Google Alerts, so I get an email every day: Parkinson's and voice, Parkinson's and exercise, Parkinson's and research, Parkinson's and technology. And that's a way to get it come to you without having to look it up every time. There are some aggregators out there that capture what's out there and process it a little bit, and that's great. So Parkinson's News Today is one that's directly for Parkinson's, and some of these other ones are scientifically related. And so you go to them, and they'll have a nice aggregation. It won't be deep, but it'll be accurate. They do a very good job. And then this is one I would say, they're not going to be scientific experts unless you're at a medical library, but librarians are expert researchers. They actually have to get a master's in library and information science, and that means that they are pretty good at finding stuff online. They'll also be able to get you some of those print resources. So if you want to get a book that I was mentioning before, you can probably get it at the library. And they'll be very well dialed into local organizations and groups. And so to me, it's one of the unsung heroes, and they might be good people to help you.
Yeah. Okay, so we will finish there,
Yeah.
and hopefully we have passed this message, which is there is an advantage for us to really consider having criterias for when I'm reading something. How am I going to look at this, and how am I going to assess if it's something that is useful, that is safe, and that is accurate?
John, I just wanted to say something about the repetition of programs. Because that's a comment that I've received, like at our conference. It's really hard to not repeat stuff when you have new people who are being diagnosed all the time. So we try to find a balance between educating new people and providing new information for people who already have that basic information. It's tricky though. So you're going to get repetition, but I often say I've heard Dr. Falconer speak I don't know how many times on the same subject over and over again, and I always learn something new. I always pick up something that maybe I didn't remember from a previous time, or something new that he's added in. So while the topic may be the same, it doesn't mean that it's going to be covered word for word as it has been in the past. Does that make sense?
I think it's very cogent, and think about this too as everyone's going through what they're dealing with Parkinson's, where you are in time and space versus something a year later, as something that wasn't something you were thinking. Thanks
you,
for coming in,
everyone.
everyone. Have a good evening or afternoon.